I welcome you all to the first day of the Obaid Siddiqi Lectures 2023 by Professor G.N. Devy. And just a quick announcement that students who want participation certificates, please register at the desk outside. And I now invite Dr. Shahana Das, who is Professor of Practice at the Department of Communication Studies, to please say a few words. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. It's my privilege to begin this 3-day session of such eminence in the field of linguistics. When I was asked to say a few words as an opening, I thought I will research languages in India, and I could not find a single scholar or website or article or journal or institute who could give me an authoritative number on how many languages there are in India. So I thought I will share with you a little bit about my own experience with language. Because you see, my parents come from 2 different languages and I knew both languages. And our man Friday spoke a 3rd language, and I just grew up with 3 languages at home and English in school. I don't think that as a child I even thought about it. So the choice of language came from who I was facing. So I would look at my mom and start the sentence in one language, turn my head, look at my dad and finish it in another language. And that was quite okay. And then after a few years, I found that I had a fair number of friends who came from Tamil Nadu and spoke Tamil, and they had lovely grandparents who loved me, and along with the taste for having curd rice with pickle, which is blasphemy for a Bengali who has it with sugar. So I have ever since had curd rice with pickle, but along with that I also picked up a smattering of Tamil. So when we were posted in Chennai for a little while, I decided to show off my Tamil, and I was frowned at because apparently my Tamil is full of Malayalam words, because most of my friends were from Palghat. And I realized that even the Odia that I grew up speaking is not only seen by its region, which is Cuttack, but also became a caste marker, because the words I used to refer to my uncle or aunt is a caste marker. And I realized that language is more than the label we know it as. The point also is that along with all these varied languages, I even tried to learn Kannada enough to yell at the traffic policeman outside for not doing his job, and he kept saying English gotilla. So I said English gotilla, Hindi gotilla, duty gotu. So that was enough Kannada for me to manage, you see. But along with all of that, there is this overwhelming language called English. The reason I'm saying it's called English is that this language that we are using right now can be understood only by us. And we have created a language that is very unique to us. And phrases like born and brought up or for what joy is very clear to us. So is it English the way, let's say, the Queen speaks it? Is it English the way Bill Gates speaks it? It is our English. Is it dominating everything else? Because I dream in English, I fight in English, I'm most comfortable yelling in English. But this is a very unique English. It's my English. And I realized that my ability to learn and understand and feel curious about many languages has opened the windows for me to understand many ways of thinking and many minds. And I think the wonder of Indians is that we take multilingual cultures and multilingual contexts very normally, and it's very beautiful. And while it is very difficult to transfer one piece of writing or creativity into another, and I especially feel that when I've been asked to translate a humorous piece in Bengali into English, and I find I'm stumbling. But the ability to know multiple languages also opens the door for many things. in humor itself. For example, if somebody says, "What do you mean?" I often say something fishy. Now you have to know Malayalam to understand what that joke is. So as many of my students here will remember, I am a bit of a pandit. But before I continue with more puns, I think I'll hand over to the real pandit here. We are all eagerly looking forward to listening to you speak and looking forward to learning from you. Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And on behalf of all of us from NCBS, I really want to thank all of you here at Mount Carmel. This has been extraordinary, the kind of work that all of you have put in. So thank you again. Credit goes to all of you. My name is Venkat. I'm part of the team at the archives at NCBS, and I just want to give a couple of words about what an archive is and what we do, because it might not be necessarily something that all of us have waded through in the course of our lives. The archive at NCBS is a public collecting center for the history of science in contemporary India. That's mainly what we do. We collect, we identify, we collect, we preserve, and we try and make it accessible to the public at large. You can come and check out our website, which is archives.ncbs.res.in. Or hopefully you would be motivated to come by to the actual archive, which is about 40 minutes north, depending on traffic. And do come pay us a visit. We'd love to come. We'd love to have you come over. There are a couple of other things that we do besides the archiving itself. We are a site of education, so we do run an internship program. We train students, we train scholars in broadly building a sensibility around the archive. We do our own research in terms of archival theory and practice, and this is something that we'll talk about a little more later. And finally, we also are a site to sort of bring broader awareness and understanding around the archive, public engagement that we do. We started the Obaid Siddiqi chair, which I'm going to call on my former Center Director Jubilee to talk about. And the Siddiqi chair is one of the components of the areas of research that is sort of stationed at the archives at NCBS. And we've been absolutely delighted to have Professor Devy with us for this last year. So without further ado, I'm going to call on Satyajit Mayer, the former Center Director of NCBS and the chair of the review committee that called upon Devy to be the chair for this year. Jitu.
Well, firstly, it's terrific to be here, and thank you so much, Dr. Das and Mount Carmel College for helping to arrange this set of 3 lectures from Professor Devy, our second Obaid Siddiqi chair. Well, I'd also like to welcome all of you to this lecture, the Obaid Siddiqi, of the Obaid Siddiqi chair in the history and culture of science. But before I begin to tell you about the role of the chair, I must say a few words about Obaid Siddiqi himself, whose name and in whose memory we have instituted this chair. Obaid was born in 1932 in Basti in Uttar Pradesh, one of 7 remarkable children, 5 of whom were women of extremely extraordinary accomplishment, and who would all share a common commitment to social transformation that Obaid himself was so emblematic of. Obaid studied at the Aligarh Muslim University in the late 40s and early 50s, and even spent time in jail in the 50s for his social activism. However, fortunately for science, his fascination with biology lured him away from this kind of activism, but he never lost his sense of social justice and equity. Obaid spent then several years in the UK and then in the USA, and I must say his easy confidence, which came from a combination of both background and achievement, as well as an impersonal focus on the question at hand, led him to return to India in the 1960s to help in building modern biology in this country. starting with the molecular biology unit at TIFR in the 1960s. He then took on building a center for the biological science, which today we call the National Center for Biological Science, located in Bangalore, as Venkat mentioned, at the other end of the city near the airport. Well, what is now the airport? We were there long before the airport was built. Obaid accomplished all this under the umbrella of the Tata Institute for Fundamental Research, where he eventually served as Professor Emeritus, and he was based at NCBS in this capacity until his untimely demise in 2013. So that's almost 10 years ago. Obaid leaves behind NCBS as one of his many legacies. It is today a world-class institution, deeply engaged with exploring biology across all scale, from molecules to ecosystems, with a profoundly interdisciplinary lens, and has also spawned many other institutions like a good biology-focused institution should. It has spawned the Institute for Stem Cell and Regenerative Science and Regenerative Medicine, which is a place for biomedical translation. The Center for Cell and Molecular Platforms, one of India's top biotech incubators, which is all in partnership with the Department of Biotechnology, which again is a somewhat remarkable fact that two departments of the government, the Department of Atomic Energy and the Department of Biotechnology, would in fact come together to do something. It also today is a home for the Tata Institute for Genetics and Society, yet another institute. So what Obaid seeded at that time has led to many, many things just a stone's throw away from here. But I must say, all these efforts are a testimony to the founding principles of open-minded inquiry and societal engagement that Obaid embodied. We therefore felt a need to create a chair who would lead a much-needed effort to bridge the gap between the sciences, social sciences, and the humanities, and foster a diverse and inclusive community of academics across disciplines. With this focus, and the archives as a foundational hub, we imagined that the chair would also build teaching and research capacity of academics at the intersection of the science and humanities. A key component of this is, in fact, the delivering of these set of lectures. And I'm sure you find these set of lectures completely reflective of the wishes that we have of the chair. We have had some amazing people who wanted to serve as the Obaid Siddiqi chair, and amongst those remarkable people, we had to make a choice. And I can't tell you how happy we are that Professor Ganesh Devy decided to take this up upon our offer. Well, you're going to hear more about Ganesh Devy from my colleague, Professor Uba Ramakrishnan, in a moment, so I will not say much more about that. But I would like to thank my colleagues, in fact, on the review committee, Janaki Nair, Ramachandra Guha, Sanjeev Jain, P. Balaram, Janaki Falke, and Umar Ramakrishnan, as well as the now new director of NCBS, Professor L. Shashidhara, who is sitting right here, as well as our sort of irrepressible head of the archives, Venkat, and Samira, without whom we would not be listening to Professor Devy today. So this chair was made possible by generous support from the TNQ Technologies and the foresight of its chairperson and managing director, Miriam Ram, who also knew and admired Obaid and all that he stood for. I thank, in addition to her, her CEO, Abhigan, who has also supported us in more ways than I can describe here. With that, well, thank you all for coming, and I'm sure you are in for a terrific treat over the next 3 days. Let me welcome Uma to introduce Professor Devy. Thank you.
everyone. Really wonderful to see such a full audience. So I'll just take a couple of minutes to introduce Professor Devy. So Professor Ganesh N. Devy is a recipient of the second Obaid Siddiqi Chair in the History and Culture of Science at the Archives at NCBS. A renowned literary scholar, historian, and social and cultural activist. He's perhaps best known for establishing the People's Linguistic Survey of India, or the PLSI. In addition to the PLSI, Professor Devy founded the Adivasi Academy and Bhasha Research and Publication Center, an organization dedicated to studying and conserving Indian languages, championing tribal art and literature, and uplifting Adivasi communities through educational and financial assistance. Really wonderful to see that combination of scholarship and activism. During his time at NCBS, he has been involved in work on the prehistory and history of Indian civilization from a linguistic perspective, dating back 12,000 years ago. In fact, on July 18th, just very recently, at the Bangalore International Center, there was also a book launch of his co-edited volume titled The Indians, Histories of a Civilization, which he co-edited with Tony Joseph, and Dr. Ravi Korisata was also here. He also ran a course while at NCBS, The People of India, that brought together various disciplines: genetics, prehistory, archaeology, linguistics, philosophy, cultural studies, and literature, to provide a unique and comprehensive picture of how we have evolved through the millennia as a people of many origins, languages, and worldviews, and cultural identities. He has also conducted several monthly informal discussions. I'm sure as students you'll really appreciate that. The opportunity for all of us has been amazing to interact with him in an informal setting at the archives on a variety of issues that concern society today at large. Many times we have all of these things we wonder about, but no spaces to discuss these issues. And just yesterday, he led the second edition of a seminar that brought together scientists from across India, from various institutions and disciplines, to understand the meaning of what doing science in India means today. The Obaid Siddiqi Chair delivers a set of 3 lectures, delivers a set of lectures in the second half of their time at NCBS. And we're really delighted, and we look forward to hearing Professor Devy's lectures, 3 lectures, today, tomorrow, and the day after, at Mount Carmel College, on India as a linguistic civilization with a focus on heritage, that's today, diversity, that's tomorrow, and the future, very aptly phrased, that's on Saturday. So thanks very much, and welcome Professor Devy, look forward to hearing you.
Professor Das and the academic community at Mount Carmel, Professor Shashidhar, Director of NCBS, Professor Satyajit Mayer, former Director and the chairperson of the chair committee for the chair of chair, all colleagues from NCBS who travel long distance despite rains and this odd hour of the day. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, to have this opportunity of speaking for today, tomorrow, and day after on the question of India, civilization, and language. But let me begin, with your permission, by mentioning St. Carmel, not the college, but the St. Carmel. Mount Carmel, I'm sorry. Mount Carmel, which is about 35-40 kilometers mountain range in Israel, northward, and which is recognized by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. It was recognized by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site because some time back in archaeological excavation Archaeologists found the some time back, archaeologists found in their excavation a skeleton. Some time back, archaeologists found in their excavation a skeleton of somebody like a human, but belonging to a time which is 3 lakh years ago. And that's a lot of time. We also found that a human-like population, Neanderthal perhaps, was there in and around Mount Carmel. And that is not enough of a reason for this recognition. There were additional reasons, and that is in the mythology or theology. Elijah is associated with Mount Carmel. Just as for Moses, that's Mount Sinai, for Elijah, it's Mount Carmel. Several orders of theological congregation were established there. And of course, one order, or in Indian parallel, I may call a sect, was the order devoted to the Mediterranean, the sea. The second, which came almost 1,000 years later, was yet another, led by a saint or a spiritual leader called just Devy. A third one, slightly different, and that is Baha'i. So, very vast spiritual heritage and a large number of stories and historical events associated with Mount Carmel make it a place to be proud of by everybody in the world. And so it is a universal heritage recognized by UNESCO. Now, in that story of Mount Carmel, there are several languages involved. There is, of course, Hebrew. There is the old variety of Arabic. There is the Armenian language. There are newer languages that came during the Ottoman Empire and in the colonial times through greater contact with the modern West. It is a kind of a meeting point of civilizations. Next door is Egypt, and when one thinks of civilizations, we cannot forget mentioning Egypt. There is Cyprus, which is actually what the old Greeks, ancient Greeks would have recognized as Greece and not as Cyprus. So there is the Greek civilization, the Egyptian civilization, and to the southeast of it, a vast expanse called Asia, which gave rise in its western part to the to the Mesopotamian, to Akkadian, and several other civilizational upsurges. So Mount Carmel knows what civilization is, and therefore today when I speak to you, I thought discussing civilization in your presence would not be inappropriate. I feel equally happy. Equally happy. And silence is superior to speech. Thank you. But what is this thing called civilization? I mean, Mount Carmel I can understand, and you can understand. Go to a geography book, go to a tourist shop, you will find, go to your dear friend Google, you will find a lot. What is this civilization? It is not an empire, it is not a nation. It is not a tradition. is something very different. And while all over the world today, if there are a little over 200 nations, we don't associate that term civilization with every nation, though the land on which those nations are located are as old as the earth. That's what are 4.3 billion years old. So the earth is one. It's as old anywhere as it is anywhere else. And yet, not all nations manage to get the epithet of civilization. We think of the Egyptian civilization, Greek civilization, Indian civilization. What is this idea of civilization? It is not a nation. Is it an empire? No, there was Roman Empire, but we don't think of a Roman civilization. There was a Mughal Empire, we don't think of a Mughal civilization. The civilization, as I understand, of course, the easiest way is to go to the root of the term. Civil, in Latin, relates to a city. So establishing a city should qualify for the term civilization. But while Bangalore was established 400 years ago, we still do not have a Bangalore civilization. I mean, I hope one day, now the airport and NCBS are there, and of course Mount Carmel someday. But this civilization thing started not as the thing itself, but a kind of a description of the thing. I'm trying to say that civilization does not exist, but some people recognize as something that existed in the past, particularly as civilization. Of course, we do use in popular language the expression modern civilization or technological, industrial civilization and so on. But that is quite distinct from the way when we use the term civilization together with Egypt or Greece. Sometime towards the end of the 17th century, in Europe, when people had started going out of Europe to other continents and had started encountering different people, but people who were not less in accomplishment than the Europeans, not inferior, but different, and had managed to attain certain civilizational heights in sophistication of variety of type. For describing those, the term civilization came in a big way. In England, the trend started after a very famous book called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. While Gibbon's book, which some students might have heard about, or maybe a few might have actually seen the book, or I fear read it also. Gibbon's book did not speak of civilization, but Edward Gibbon did create a mood of getting excited about the past, and particularly the greatness in the past. See, after the Protestant movement came in Europe, the past was seen as dark ages. The medieval times were seen as Europe's dark ages. All these centuries of the fights between Muslims and Christians were seen as a pointless waste of human energy. Gibbon lifted the spirit of Europe and tried to show that everything in the past was not bad, everything was not a decline, but there were peaks of achievement. It is in that excitement about the past, in the mood to admire the past, a little over-admire the past, I'll say, excessive admiration for the past, that the term civilization took root in the social and historical discourse of Europe. And so, somebody who was in his teens when Gibbon had become great fashion, having come to India, started looking and having started looking at the past of languages, suddenly thought of using the term civilization. That was William Jones. End of the 18th century, William Jones is saying, look, my Latin and my Greek and your Persian and your Sanskrit almost look alike. So is it possible that they all come from a single mother? Jones, who had come to India at a fairly young age, he was only 24 when he landed in India, 24, maybe 25, and had studied Greek and Latin back home, and tried to get some Persian, a little bit of Arabic and Sanskrit after coming here. Suddenly started noticing a lot of similar words. And so he created a hypothesis. It was guesswork. He guessed. It was a wild guess. There was no evidence. But as in science, you make a guess, you build a hypothesis which can be tested later by later generations. William Jones proposed that possibility of a mother of all these different languages should not be ruled out, and we must look in that direction of finding out the root, the origin of all these languages. Till then, in European scholars of language and linguistics, the idea of a single origin was very dominant. And it was derived obviously from, as you know, the story of the Tower of Babel, that there was one language and then it fragmented into many languages. That was the, as scientists call it, the dominant paradigm, the governing paradigm at that time. And so Jones started looking at not the differences between the languages. He did not look at how these different languages evolved. They had evolved. He started looking at how these different languages were united at the source. So, in that search, some decades later, when linguists found that there was actually a sample and evidence of literature which could go back to about 1500 years before Christ, but evidence in oral tradition, the Vedas. They suddenly said, this is the 19th century scholars, and if you like, you can rush through the 19th century, come to the end of that century with someone like Friedrich Max Müller, who said that we are in the 19th century, but nearly 1400 years before Christ, and that's add 19 to 14, that's a long time, more than 3000 years ago, there were people who could think about the cosmos, think about life, think about the world in the loftiest possible manner. So they said this is the earliest sample of language and literature, and with that as the central point, they started going out to see if the pre-Christian Greek and Latin had any connections with that language. So the whole exercise became comparing one language with another, finding out parallels, and kind of drawing a map of the connections between these languages. Doing all this, they came to the conclusion that India had a great civilization in the past. Students will ask me this question as to why Max Müller or William Jones did not say that India has a civilization. The answer is very obvious. The British had to justify their presence here, and therefore they had to claim that they were here to civilize the Indians, re-civilize if you like to say so. Because without that, their presence had no other justification. Having acquired control over the entire territory, Burma, Sri Lanka, India, now what is now Bangladesh, Pakistan, parts of Afghanistan, they looked at their own God-given mission as the mission to civilize Indians. So their sense of history was, yes, India had a great civilization in the past, then it declined, and now with modern knowledge, Western knowledge, the civilization will flourish once again. This is how the term civilization was attached to the Indian context. With Egypt, the story was different. The Greeks had gone to Egypt and found pyramids almost 3,000 years before our time, where they learned that the pyramids were built another 1,000 years before that time. And they came back in great admiration for the sense of trigonometry, geometry, study of lights and shadows, and they started talking of the Egyptian civilization. So the word Egyptian civilization was given to us by the Greeks. Indian civilization was given to us by the British. Other civilizations in Western Asia were a result of a lot of archaeological excavation, but more important, even more important than that, was a great interest in metallurgy and science related to arms. How metal was used, how kingdoms were formed, how arms were used, what was the warfare technique, all those things. The net result of all this curiosity, in Sanskrit there is an expression, Athato Brahma Jignasa, great curiosity about the entire universe. So out of this great curiosity about the entire world, these terms got associated with some people, some nations, some points in the past history, in historical times, in human past. Therefore, civilization is only an idea, is only a descriptive label, selectively used, depending on when and who coined that label. There is nothing like any objective set of criteria to decide what is a civilization and what is a non-civilization. With that caveat, let me turn to the question of language. But I must also say why I want to turn to the question of language. With the Egyptian civilization, the essence, the heart of that civilization was an idea that in some oversimplified terms, I can say was a idea in geometry, a triangle. And I am not saying this triangle because they constructed pyramids. They did, and pyramids are amazing things, still continue to be one of the wonders universally. But I am thinking of a triangle in philosophical terms. They interpreted existence in terms of a triangle, that is, there is a divine or unknown power unknown to us humans, and it has its own realm, its own universe, its own existence, own dynamics. Then we are there, but between that and us, there is a third point in the way the Egyptians imagined the society. And that point was a class of people called the pharaohs. The pharaohs could understand God's language, it seems. They could also understand human languages. But the others did not understand God's languages. And therefore the Pharaoh was allowed to interpret what God says. So this guy, one of the persons belonging to this class, would sit next to the idol of God, temple. And when somebody approached, would interpret what God was saying. And if the Pharaoh did not listen God's voice at that particular moment, whatever the Pharaoh said became God's voice. It was an arrangement, a social arrangement. It was a political arrangement. But it became the heart of the civilization in Egypt. I do not know if the term Purohit in Sanskrit is derived from the term pharaohs in Egypt. But it's more or less similar kind of arrangement. Of course, in much changed circumstances. A person who understood the future and the past, who could understand you, your mind, your life without you having to express yourself. The pharaohs did not like or want people to speak to them. They just wanted people to listen to them, as I am doing now. The Greek civilization was not based on this triangular relationship. It worked in terms of parallel lines. This is even funnier. Quite interesting, but amusing. The Greeks thought that the sky, the Greek physicists, let me call them people who understood physics or astrophysics, since we are in the city where Raman Institute is, astrophysics. The Greeks thought that the sky is not the ultimate ceiling on the top of our heads, our head tops. There is something beyond that, and the sky has perforations of holes in it. If you look at the ceiling here, lights coming, the tube lights of the Greeks felt that light percolates down through those holes. And which were these holes? The stars that they saw at night were seen as absence, not as presence, as lack of substance, rather than some different substance. The Greeks believed, and truly believed, every inch of their being they believed, that the world above the skies we see is full of light. All time. They don't need a government to give them 200 units free. It was completely free and forever, from the beginning to the end. Never fading light. The Greeks also believed as if the universe was like a box, a shoe box if you like. They believed that under the earth there's an area which is full of darkness. And their scientific explanation was that no light ever comes from beneath the earth to the human world. Now, this would have been all right, but then they went a step further. And they said, the light from above and the darkness from below create a shadow for every substance. And that shadow became a great philosophical problem for all Greeks. When you will study, this is for students, whenever in future you study Plato's writings, you will find in Plato a caveman standing at the, who's never seen anything outside. He just walks to the mouth of the cave. But he turns back because there's very sharp light coming in. He sees his own long shadow falling inside the cave, feels very scared. He says, I'm here, the cave is here, the light, but from where has the shadow come? Who is the shadow? Is it life or is it death? What is the source? And can I dissociate my body from that shadow? For humans it was not possible. No substance could be dissociated from its shadow. The Greeks developed all fields of knowledge in terms of the substance versus shadow, the virtual versus physical. And today we are deeply engaged in developing a virtual world, and it's a Greek pursuit. It's a shadowy world, virtual world, and very soon all of us will no longer be bodies. Already we are reduced to our digital Aadhaar card number or various numbers, and very soon we will only be non-substantial, non-physical, virtual presences. Those presences will matter more than we matter as bodies. I mean, you know, some of you, if you punch the card at 9 or 8 in the morning, the body can go out, but the shadow can stay on the campus, and yet that is counted as a single day. Am I wrong? This is the Greek tradition of knowledge. The Greek civilization was based on the idea of dichotomy, opposition between the shadow and the substance. So the Egyptians are working with the cosmos, with the world universe, in terms of a figure, a diagram, a triangle. The Greeks are working with the existence in terms of this non-reconcilable parallel lines of the world of light and the world of dis, the death, darkness. What did the Indian civilization do? What was the basis of that civilization? Was duality, dichotomy the basis of Indians as in the Greek civilization? Was some unifying diagram such as a circle, a triangle, a square, or what was that great abstraction that Indians found as the unifying idea for all people that were there when the Indian civilization first emerged? I said, I will tell you. I said, I am turning to the question of language. And I also said, I will tell you why I am turning to that question. I am turning to that question because, in my opinion, considered opinion, language or sound or voice is what brings the Indian civilization into existence. And from now on, till Saturday evening, I'll be elaborating this idea. First, let me explain what I understand by language. Of course, I know names of some languages. When I arrived here this afternoon, I was asking young friends which languages they speak. They told me it was Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Hindi, Marathi, Gujarati, and so on. I also asked them in which language or languages they dream, and they were thinking about whether to give away personal information or not. So, but they gave me some, because out of politeness they did respond to my question. I did not push them any further into embarrassing areas. I am not thinking of language as our class 5 or class standard 5 or standard 6 teacher thinks of language as a set of grammatical rules. I am not thinking of language as professional linguists who define language think of language. I mean, what do professional linguists do? The most standard definition, I mean, you open any standard text of linguistics, and in the first chapter there is a definition of what is language. Just as in the first chapter of book of physics, they define what is matter. The definition that linguistics gives is, language is an arbitrary system of signs. Arbitrary, because nobody had choice in selecting those signs. There is no predictability about those signs. they change. One cannot anticipate which signs will enter language. But saying this is saying absolutely nothing about language. Since they cannot define what that system is, they use the term arbitrary system. So arbitrary system is almost like a foolish wisdom. It's a paradox. I'm not looking at language as a system of grammar, as a set of words, as a set of rules. I'm looking at language slightly differently. And my view is, let me use a slightly difficult word. I do not know if my consciousness, my chitta, my self-awareness, my awareness of the what is around me, I'm not talking of the conscience, I'm talking of consciousness. I do not know if my consciousness is there or a hallucination that I accepted for my convenience. And worse still, in any case, a person today is hardly a person. It's a set of brands put together, stapled together. But I'll not get into that. Worse still is, the world spread outside one's mind. German philosopher Immanuel Kant uses the term the phenomenal world, the world of phenomena. Phenomena is a plural, phenomenon is singular. These days there's a lot of mix-up with that. The phenomenal, the world outside us, from here to the ultimate horizon, from here to the highest skies, deepest seas, the world surrounding us. I'm not sure if it is really there. If it is really there the way I see it. Now, given these two uncertainties, I don't know if my consciousness is a myth. I'm doping myself, it's a kind of false belief. I don't know what the world outside is. What I know for sure is there is a bridge connecting the two. And that bridge is language. And that bridge is available in a very sophisticated, advanced form only to Homo sapiens humans. It's available to the animal that uses very complex language which can express extremely complex perception of time and perception of space. I don't know how many of you actually met two tigers at the same time, or two elephants. But with elephants I'm not so sure, but with tigers I can say, so Uma will tell me more about it. When two tigers meet, can they exchange the sentiment which says, 10 years back when we were in that another forest, things were better, they were cheaper, now inflation has gone up. They won't be able to bring in so much of past in their expression, in their experiential world. Yes, of course, they have memories. When the smallest bug, smallest ant will have that kind, every cell of every being will have that memory, chemical memory or whatever it is. But humans have created the idea of time. Time does not exist. There is no objective existence for time. We imagine time. We first imagined it, and then we learn to master it with the help of language. It is humans alone who can use a very strange structure like the past tense. I was very happy till last year. Only humans can say. But I don't know if birds say that. Though birds also have some articulation language. Language for humans is a weapon, a method, a bridge, allowing them to bring together a very vast range of experience. Let me take one step, let me go ahead one step further. Supposing in the brain, you heard that, this is for students, I must say. You heard the term brain? Yeah, good. I am amazed, so many of you are still awake. In the brain, if there are neurons which bring, when I touch this bottle, some neurons tell me that it is hard, it is transparent, it contains water. Billions of them. I don't know, biologists tell me almost 85,000 billion, 85 billion water neurons work in the brain. Language actually does the same work outside the brain for humans. It captures the texture, the tone, the dynamics of things and brings that knowledge. It's not, neurons analyze language. And so we have the ability in one part of the brain to analyze those signals. For me, language is a substance which allows us to be human. To have language is to be human. So I'm not talking about set of rules or set of words, but the humanness of humans is what language is. In one sense. Now so I'll go ahead from there. I was saying that language is the essential stuff or attribute of Indian civilization. And this is very difficult to accept just now. But if I were to ask you a different question, what is it that brings India into being as India? Is it our territory? Is it our past? Is it our metaphysical or religious philosophy? Is it our set of social habits? None of these questions can satisfactorily explain why and how we are Indians. Because we have many religions, sects, many philosophies, and our geography is very diverse. And the map of India has been changing over centuries very, very frequently. Today it is some map, maybe after 50 years, 100 years, it could be another map carrying that. So there is no permanence there. But Indian behavior of language behavior, the way Indians cope with language, the way Indians generate language, that is unique. You will ask me why I am not saying the same thing with the Egyptians or with the Greeks. The answer is that the time when the Egyptian civilization, what we call the Egyptian civilization, came up, technologies humans use were of one kind. The time when the Greek civilization came up, the technologies used by humans were of another kind. The time when Indian civilization came up, the technologies that people use were of yet another kind. In that technology, language took front seat as far as India is concerned. And therefore, our civilization got shaped around the question of language. Just as in modern Europe, technology, that is the last 400 years, shaped the world differently, and so we call it technological industrial civilization. Don't ask me the question as to which was the Indian language. Did we not have one language out of which hundreds of languages came up? Because that question makes absolutely no sense if you look at the history of people in India. Genetics tells us that Homo sapien is that arrogant animal which thinks that it has brains. I mean, it is very intelligent. Homo sapien is intelligent man. If you look at the history of people in India, genetics tells us that Homo sapien is that arrogant animal which thinks that it has brains. I mean, it is very intelligent. Homo sapien is intelligent man. Actually, the Neanderthal found in Mount Carmel was also differently, equally intelligent. But we survived. The worst there were many kinds of humans, but the one that survived was the worst among all of them. And the worst always survives, as you know. All the best people in the world know that. The Homo sapien moved out of Africa, weaponized language for securing advance during that migration, and eventually arrived in this part of the world. Just as beyond this part of the world, the Homo sapien also went to Australia, through Russia to what is now the United States, the Americas, and so on. Went to Europe, all over the world. The movement or migration of the ancient modern man, genetics calls these people modern man, and the ancient, very ancient modern man, the movement started in search of food, not in search of energy or shelter, in search of food. And so these people who wanted to go grab, hunt and collect, hunt and eat, hunters and gatherers, they were moving along the line, developing small tools, instruments. Sometimes they were made of little stones, rocks, and so on. The Homo sapien reached this continent maybe about 65 to 70,000 years ago. People in the Andaman have, scientists tell me, have moved there some 65,000 years before our time. From Africa, I mean, they did not, of course, go by buses or trains or planes. There were no planes or buses or trains. They walked along the coastal line. Prior to, there were many times when the weather was very cold, and there are other times when the weather was sufficiently warm for people to make movements. The last such very significantly destructive cold age lasted for about 7,000 years, from 18,000 years before our time to about 12,000 years before our time. But 12,000 years before our time, the climate changed, and if you look at the earth as a globe, closer to the poles, the climate obviously was very cold. It was all snow-capped part of the earth. But closer to the equator, where there is greater sun, as the snows melted, people moving in, 10 degrees north of equator, 10 degrees south of equator, there was greater possibility of life. We kind of, fall in that zone, and so people who came here found enough animal, bird and plant food for their survival. They stayed on. Some of them moved ahead and formed another camp. These small groups of nomadic hunter-gatherers forming camps and habitation, formed what anthropologists call population knots, K-N-O-T-S. Population bunch of people. And these bunches were sufficiently large for them to defend everybody in that bunch, and sufficiently small to allow everybody in that bunch to get food in the surrounding areas. If the bunch became too large, the population not had, as in Bangalore, there is I think 1 crore or something like that. That would be unsustainable in contemporary terms, sustainability, transparency, accountability. 800 to 900 persons in one population, not 1,000 persons typically. And if they stay there from 65,000 years to 12,000 years, from 12,000 years before our time to 8 or 9,000 years, in 3,000 years, their speech inherited from their ancestors, their predecessors, acquired a different tone, different texture, became a different language. If you were to look at the population dispersal in India, from where these groups further migrated, you find certain locations particularly in the central part of India, particularly where there is a greater provision of tribal population. From there they move out. They are new languages. I am talking of the years 12,000 years before our time till about 6,000 years before our time. 6,000 years is a long time for these languages to come up. About 6,000 or 7,000 years before our time, agriculture started spreading from Iran to India. Now, why did it come from Iran to India? Why did it not go from India to Iran? Because India was Vishwaguru and all that. I mean, at the moment, we leave that question of Vishwaguru also. It came from Iran to India because agriculture was not a funded project of people. It was a need for survival. Where there was shortage of food resource, people had to look at how plants behave and then replicate those plants. And that's how agriculture developed. And seed culture started. As food shortages started cropping up in areas where there was food sufficiency, people learned those techniques of harvesting, of growing, cropping, sowing, working there, cultivating land, which they had not done before. And therefore, late arrival of agriculture is not a sign of backwardness, it is a sign of your having sufficient food at home prior to that time. So don't feel insulted that agriculture came to us from Iran. Actually, we had enough food, enough fish, enough birds, enough animals to eat. When agriculture came, people developed terms in their local languages for implements, tools, plant varieties, and animal varieties. They also developed terms to understand this new behavior of humans. Why was the behavior new? Till then, humans were not bending their spines so much. I mean, humans are extremely reluctant to bend. When I was a school-going child in a village, my teacher knew this, and every time I made a mischief, I was made to bend down and hold my toes. The punishment is horrible. Agriculture requires you touching the earth. The physical posture change. With every technology, the bodily posture of humans has changed in history. That form of labor also brought in new terminology. I mention all of this because it was about 1400 years before Christ, that is 21 centuries after Christ, 14 centuries before Christ, 35 centuries. 3,500 years before our time, Sanskrit arrived here. But much prior to that, for several thousand years, in dozens of languages, Indian languages, there were terms related to agriculture and nature. When Sanskrit arrived here, 1400 years before our time, Pali was already taking advanced shape, and Buddha could actually advise people using Pali and some Prakrits. Mahavir Jain could advise people, speak to people in Prakrits. Proto-Dravidic was in existence because there were people in the south, in Karnataka and in Tamil Nadu. There were people for the last 45,000 years, and it is not as if they were never speaking. They spoke. They related to nature. They understood the cosmos. They had language. They had consciousness, and they had the phenomenal reality. The Dravidic world, the Pali world, and the Prakrit world were fairly well developed by the time Sanskrit touched the shores of India. I will now come close to my conclusion. So, Samira or someone will have to tell me when to stop. Have I crossed time? Already? I have crossed time. I'll say the last sentence. I'll say the remaining things tomorrow. Good. 5 minutes? We started late. I'll complete this point. This is of interest to everybody in India because the way we are shaped. It is in the second millennium means 1,000 years, second millennium before Christ, that India becomes a melting pot of languages. Our national food should have been khichdi. Everybody likes it. I mean, you mentioned curd rice with lemon pickle, sugar added to it. It's a new version of khichdi. We became a language khichdi. We became a language mix. Sanskrit came because horses were cultivated in Eurasian steppes. Wheels were known, and so people tied wheels to the horses and formed cars that could carry them at a fast speed. By then, arrows were known, and this became a very rapid assault weapon. That brought those people here on an expansion spree, and they brought Sanskrit language with them. This language and its encounter with the local languages that were there created a new philosophical quest in India, a new question about existence. And you will notice that from the 7th century before Christ till the 4th century before Christ, those 400 years, 7th, 6th, 5th and 4th centuries, the best of the philosophical literature was produced in India, in the Upanishads in Sanskrit, in the Buddhist tradition and in the Jaina tradition. But also here the first Sangam is 7th century before Christ. There's a record in Tamil. I mean, those of you who speak Tamil. Those 4 centuries were producing new thought, new questions, and open society willing to accept many people, many languages coming in from many directions. And that churning changed the worldview of India. That became the moment when Indian civilization came into being. And therefore the foundation of Indian civilization is the language mix. My last sentence, we have not stopped that moment till today. We have today in India, in 2011 census, which is the last census. You know what census is counting of heads. And so counting of heads that, this time 2021 census has gone on a sabbatical leave. or some nature cure, no census has taken. 2011 census, the number of mother tongues mentioned by Indians were admitted mother tongues. There were many not admitted. Admitted mother tongues by Indians in 2011 were 1,369. 1,369 mother tongues Indians claim as Indians. There is no other country in the world, including Papua New Guinea, which was supposed to be having more languages, Nigeria and Indonesia, which have great profusion of languages. No other country in the world has so many languages. Living language. When I counted living languages in India, I came across 780 living languages in the country, and I missed on many. I must also add very quickly that 50 years ago, in 1961, when the census took place, the number of mother tongues was 1652. That means in 50 years' time, we lost 1652 minus 1389. Difficult, but roughly 275 languages died, which means the great Indian civilization, which is a linguistic civilization, is being pushed by you and me. No, actually, me and you. I am more responsible than you are. The great Indian civilization founded on language mix and language diversity is being pushed by me and you towards its grave. I shall speak tomorrow about the language diversity, how much it is, and why we are in a mad act of pushing Indian civilization towards a grave, exactly at the same time when we are also pushing the other biodiversity to its grave. We are equally enthusiastically destroying biodiversity and language diversity. I feel sad about it. But tomorrow and after tomorrow, we'll think about why this has happened and what possibly can be done to get out of this. With this, I thank you. I also thank you for tolerating me for the excess of time, and I stop there.
Thank you, Professor Devy. That was incredible. One of the points that blew my mind was when you said that a language acts the same way as neurons or the brain does. Just like the brain processes stimuluses and collects it, language sort of acts as a societal collector of impressions. I was curious based on that, in collecting what all is happening, languages would end up collecting foundational stories. What you described of the triangle and the parallel lines are also foundational stories of the Egyptian and Greek civilizations. So, what is your thought on how, in a place that has so many diverse languages, what does that then have to do with the kinds of foundational stories that we have, and how do we keep up that diversity of foundational stories?
See, there has been a dialectical process. Many of the people in this country believe that Om is the source. Actually, it's a word. It's a phoneme cluster which has no meaning. But people have their Shraddha, Astha, I respect it. But parallel to that, there is another tradition, and that is, you might have heard of the Mahabharata. In the first book of the Mahabharata, there is a story about telling of the Mahabharata. The first recitation of the Mahabharata is reported in the Mahabharata's Adi Parva. that recitation takes place in a college, in an ashram, and some terribly weird-looking fellow, say me, comes to that ashram and starts singing a story, and all the kids, all the students forget everything else they were doing and listen to him. When he stops, they say, please don't stop, tell the complete story. He says, Ashtadasha, this is Sanskrit, please pardon me for using it, because it's also one of the languages. Ashtadasha sahasrani, ashtadasha shatani cha, aham vetti, shuko vetti, sanjaya vetti, vanava. Shuka knows 8,000. And Sanjay also perhaps knows 8,000 lines of this story. But my lines are different from what Sanjay knows. Sanjay's lines are different from what Shuka knows. Who is Shuka? Shuka is a horse keeper. Sanjay is a half Brahmin. And this man who's come from the forest is actually, I don't like to describe him this way, but allow me as an exception, a tribal, a forest dweller. So a forest dweller knows the story, part of it. A half Brahmin knows part of the story. Somebody who is animal keeper knows, a veterinary expert knows a third part of the story. Many stories were always together. India does not have a single story, single origin and a complete story. The Indian story is perpetually unfinished, perpetually diverse and completely democratic, that everybody's story is allowed. Every tribe has story of origin. But in India, they do not stand out as as odd people, unless some government rule wants to level them. Government regulation calls some of them primitive tribes. I mean, it's shocking. We should be protesting against this. The other day I went to Orissa, Juang tribe. In the Juang village, this is Kionjar district, on a hill. When I went to that village, there are about 30-40 houses. There was one house which belonged to nobody. But in that house, slightly raised above the ground, on a raised platform, a log was burning, very long log. I said, why is it burning? Did somebody die? Is this a cremation? Or they said, no, we keep this log in fire, in burning state, all the time. When one log is over, we put another log. I said, how do you get these logs? Is there no shorts of, they live in forest. They said, we have a ceremony for planting trees where the third generation will get logs from that tree. Every grandfather plants a tree for the granddaughter. Every grandmother plants a tree for the grandson. I said, but you mean this fire has never gone out? They said, no. In our memory, we do not remember a time when this fire did not exist, which means this fire belongs to the times before 12,000 years prior to our time. That is their story. That is their story. In India, we allow that story to be there, except for these regulations which want everybody to be alike. There is often a strange kind of noise coming called unity in India. Unity in India. The unity in India is a good idea, except that when there is unity, India will not be there. Because India is diversity. Only diversity. I am saying 1,300 languages. That means every language is a unique world view, looking at space and time. We got about 1,400 ways of looking at space and time. That's fascinating. There is one more thing. As I know, I have been spending time in the Biology Institute and I learned there though Darwin is made illegal in India, I learned there that evolution can progress only if diversity is around. Because the evolutionary energy chooses some, it never goes ahead in straight lines. Evolution is not like a flyover built here. It's nature's intelligence working to choose different attributes while dropping off some older attributes, acquiring new attributes without losing identity. And therefore, diversity is necessary for our progress. We have many stories. Greece had, unfortunately, one and the only story, and all the others in Greece who wanted to have other different stories were punished as discarded gods. A god of the sea, Poseidon, was treated as a curse god. A Psyche, for the mind we use that term, is a Greek mythological figure. That's a punished girl. Psyche was a very lovely girl, dreaming of a lover who used to visit her, off and on without anybody else knowing. Suddenly they decided to. She was found allowing this lover's visit, and she was punished. And since then, in the Western world, the mind became a closed affair. Yeah. For every short question, I am going to give a long answer. So think 3 times before you answer.
Hi, Professor. Great talk. So my question is about, we are talking about the philosophy in some centuries, it showed more complexity, you were saying, when different languages were there, like Prakrit and all these languages were there. So my question is about, as you said in your recent answer, that this languages were the outlook of how people see time and space, and from there the philosophy come up. So what is the reason of this complexity? It was because of the interaction between all these languages taking place, or is there any different reason for that you can pitch?
No, as a student I had to study modern European history, and I used to ask my teacher this question as to why did Europe progress so much? But the answer given was, Europe was acutely aware that it lacked something, and so they decided to go to the world outside to find what they lacked. The ability to feel humble, to accept another as a welcome guest, is a sure key for progress in thought. Our sciences, our philosophy, our literature developed whenever we welcome somebody. I'll give 2 or 3 instances. Sanskrit was welcome in India like nobody's business. So was Persian welcome. In the 16th, 17th, 18th century, Persian was as good as our national language. And there was a great blossoming of literature. Your Mira, Kabir, Tukaram, your so many great writers came. We accepted the English language. We were crazy. At the beginning of the 19th century, some Bengali people went to England. Rajaram Mohan Rai spent 16 years there. He camped there and met every MP, pleading with the MPs, please come and teach us English. We welcomed that language and we gained a lot. So welcoming the other allows one's mind to open up. But when we stop welcoming and we start hating and we say we won't allow any people to come from Bangladesh into Assam, they won't be our citizens. I think we are driving ourselves close to the end of curiosity. End of curiosity. Any teacher, you have many teachers. This I'm teachers who say they don't know the subject, but they're actually exploring the subject with you, are among the very best teachers. Yes.
Yeah, so nice talk. It's a very broad subject that you're discussing. 12,000 years. Condense it into an hour, and we all know that that means leaving a lot of things, a lot of lopa. And suppose my question is, what allows you to, for instance, do that? This kind of large generalization. How can you justify it? Because after all, it takes leaving out a number of things for that to happen. And also, what makes you think of Egypt, Greek and Indian civilizations in the way that you did? For instance, I think there's a fairly good argument that Greece also was linguistically advanced when you go back to its epics and had, the dating may be a little off and on, because Mueller, who dated all of these things, believed in the Bible's origin, Genesis, and so there's some talk about that being off. But what I mean broadly is what allowed you to conclude that these were the three paradigms: the triangle, the parallel line, and language, even though language is common to all of these civilizations that you mentioned and every civilization that has really ever existed to some extent.
Thank you for that question. I gratefully asked that question. One thing is, to reduce it to 1 hour was not my choice. But I would love to go on speaking for hours and hours and hours. Very fond of that. But as etiquette, protocol of this meeting, and please allow me to promise the audience that I am going to punish the audience for 2 more hours tomorrow and after. So this is not the last. But about my conclusion about the Greek and the Indian and the Egyptian is based on the assumption that in a society, anesthetic and aesthetic form a spectrum. That is the curing and the taming of the physical, anesthetic, and the exciting and the celebration of the senses, aesthetic, anesthetic and aesthetic. One deals with control of pain, other management of pleasure. Therefore, coming to the heart of any civilization, if one looks at which have been the most influential theories of pain and pleasure in that society, one can get fairly close to the heart of the matter. In Greece, Aristotle wrote his treatise on poetry, and for us, 2 very great minds. One is Tolkappiyar of Tamil, who if there somebody called Tolkappiyar existed, Tolkappiyar, great text, and Bharata's Natya Shastra, Bharat Muni's Natya Shastra. In poetics of Aristotle, the idea of beauty or pleasure coming out of beauty is explained by the artist's ability to create an ideal object. When I asked what is this ideal object, the answer that the Greek literature gives is the object up there in the domain of perpetual light, it will never die, never perish. Whereas chairs in this world are made and they collapse. But a chair or a table in that world will never collapse because death does not touch it, and therefore it is ideal. Ideal in that philosophical sense, not in our popular sense of ideal. The artist's job, as determined by Aristotle, was to imitate that ideal And therefore his theory was called mimesis, imitation theory. For us, we have in the Natya Shastra the rasa, having many varieties. That is, Bibhatsa also can be rasa. Shaurya can be rasa. But Bharat takes care of explaining the creation of rasa in terms of linguistic style of creating that rasa. He talks of the tropes and the metaphors that will generate the rasa, not some ideal outside this universe. On the basis of this treatment of the pleasure and the pain spectrum in these two societies, articulated by the mightiest of the philosophers in respective civilizations, I arrived at that conclusion. As far as the Egyptians are concerned, I have not had the chance to study Egyptian philosophy, and I based my premise on the experience of traveling through Egypt and by analyzing the visual culture of the Egyptians. Unfortunately, a lot we know about Egypt comes to us in second-hand European source. You know, somebody like Emile will write History of Nile, but I don't think Egyptians looked at the Nile River with the same eyes as a German scholar looked at it. But I accept my limitations. However, to build a grand theory about the universe is necessary in times when the hearts and the minds are sinking and getting kind of marooned into petty, divisive times.
Thank you. I think we have time for 2 more questions. One question from perhaps the youngest member of the audience here.
Yeah. So first of all, a very nice talk. It's splendid. And I wanted to ask, is there a connection between biodiversity and the number of languages?
Yes, 1-to-1 connection. I'll tell you, what is your name? What is your name?
Vihan.
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 Vihan. Okay. That is one who soars in the sky.
No, Vihan.
Vihan. Vihan. Okay, I heard Vihan. Okay, Vihan. There is a connection between biodiversity and language. And just as humans have stopped, which language do you speak at home?
English and Hindi.
हिंदी. जैसे इंसान एक दूसरे को सुन नहीं रहा, ऐसे इंसान पेड़ों को, फूलों को, पत्तों को, कीड़े मकोड़े जो है कीटक, उनको सुन नहीं रहा है. वो चिल्ला रहे हैं, हमें जीने दो. देखो, मैं एयरपोर्ट से बेंगलोर में आया और एयरपोर्ट के बाजू में बहुत अच्छे फूल के पेड़ है, पौधे हैं, लेकिन उस रोड पे लाखों गाड़ियाँ कार जाओ तो उनके धुएं से वो फूल मरते हैं. एक तरफ गवर्नमेंट वो फूल लगाते, उस पर पैसे लगाते, बड़े होर्डिंग्स लगाते, ब्यूटीफुल बेंगलोर, और वो गाड़ियाँ उनको मारने का काम करते, उसके लिए रास्ते बनाए. तो ये हम लोग हम बहरे और अंधे बन गए हैं. मैं जब आपके उम्र का बच्चा था, यू डोंट माइंड माई कॉलिंग यू बच्चा, आई होप नॉट.
I don't.
हाँ, तो मैं शाम को मेरे छोटे गांव में फायरफ्लाइज देखता था. फायरफ्लाइज वो अब बहुत कम दिखते हैं. कुछ जगह दिखते हैं, हमारे NCBS कैंपस पे दिखते हैं, बहुत अच्छा गार्डन है, लेकिन बेंगलोर में नहीं दिख रहे. I think a society which loses its fireflies loses its desire to keep life intact. और उस समय लोग एक दूसरे से बातें नहीं करते, फिर वो अपने मोबाइल से बात करते. मेरे बहुत सारे दोस्त सुबह उठते ही आँख खुलती है तो मोबाइल की तरफ देखते हैं, और जब सो जाते हैं तो हम बच्चे थे तो हमारी दादी माँ नानी कहानी कहती थी, हम कहानी सुनते. आजकल हम सोने के 1 सेकंड पहले अंतिम मोबाइल मैसेज देख के अलार्म लगा के फिर सोते हैं। तो हम मोबाइल के अंदर घुस गए हैं। हम समाज से, दुनिया से उठ के मोबाइल के अंदर वर्चुअल उसको बोलते हैं। वी एंटर द वर्चुअल वर्ल्ड इरिवर्सिबली। अब उसमें से बाहर आना बड़ा मुश्किल बन गया। और उस वर्चुअल वर्ल्ड में आर्टिफिशियल पत्ते, पौधे, फूल खिल सकेंगे, लेकिन असली फूल, पत्ते, पौधे नहीं होंगे। ये बात है। सो यू आर राइट, भाषा ये जीवन जिंदा रखने का तरीका है। लेकिन आजकल हम एक दूसरे से बोलते ही नहीं। मैं बस में जाता हूँ तो सब लोग अपना मोबाइल देखते हैं, कोई भी एक दूसरे से। पहले हम ट्रेन में घूमते थे तो एक दूसरे से बात करते, अब कोई बात नहीं करते। बातें बंद हो गई है और केवल डिजिटल वर्ल्ड हमारे लिए खुल रहा है। और ज़्यादा ऐप आता है, रोज एक नया ऐप आता है, रोज एक नया ऐप आता है। बट यू चेंज द वर्ल्ड व्हेन यू ग्रो अप, मेक इट डिफरेंट. Ask people to stop using their mobiles. Do you use a mobile? Okay, thank you. There's a lovely poem by William Wordsworth. Yeah. My heart leapt up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. So it was when I was a child, so it is now that I am man, so it will be when I grow old, etc. etc. Because the child is the father of man. वो बचपन खोने का तरीका ये मोबाइल, जो बच्चे मोबाइल यूज करते वो अपना बचपन खो देते। Thank you.
So, thank you very much for a great talk. I just wanted to add, because I guess from my field I have to contribute something, because you would have come to it already if you had the time, as you said earlier. This binary thing, it seems like always imposed upon the so the binary aspect has been always constantly being dwelt on whenever we talk about the Western civilization as such. I mean, the post-structuralist has shown that many of these other non-binary ideas, or the Dionysian part, because the one you spoke about was the Apollonian one, so those have been like meddling with this non-binary aspect, or the non-binary has been meddling with the binary as such. And so I thought that I should kind of talk about it. You can also, say your comment as such. But it's just my concern, because many times the knowledge surfacing is only because of certain power and discourses that happen to be, somehow managing it, kind of a thing. And these other kind of thoughts, in any culture for that matter, seems to be like submerged and repressed. And sometimes these kind of works, the post-structural ones, seem to pull out these repressions and then express it and so on. It's just that we didn't pay attention to the message. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. I take your suggestion very seriously. I was extremely fond of reading Foucault, Derrida, etc. etc. But for last 35 years, I decided to listen to the Adivasis. I spent several decades in a village listening to them. And I learned that they have many things to teach us. Yesterday in that science discussion, somebody was saying that knowledge may be short stock, but they share it. Shared knowledge, even if it is little, is more effective than large knowledge which remains unshared. That was the view there. I think the logic of logically correct or logical or illogical does not reflect the structure of our thought. The cognitive revolution which made us humans did not tell us any time that you will have choice between the two. But in the West, this binary was brought in for financial, legal, political purposes. Even we accepted, in elections we vote for somebody, when nota in none of the above is not still popular. I belong to that nota group.